Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jason Marzak, Vice President, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. Today's conversation centers on one of the most important waterways in the world, the Panama Canal. The canal has long played an essential role in global commerce, facilitating roughly 5% of worldwide maritime trade. As well, the waterway connects nearly 2,000 ports across 1,700 countries, supporting the movement of over $270 billion worth of cargo annually. By serving as a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, it significantly reduces transit times and costs for vessels. Last year alone, over 9,900 transits took place, with vessels carrying everything from natural gas shipments to manufactured goods, raw materials, and agricultural products. The canal is also critical to U.S. trade, with more than 74% of the U.S. trade volume heading to or coming from American ports. Beyond trade, the Panama Canal has become a recent focal point for U.S. foreign policy. President Donald Trump has voiced strong concerns about China's involvement around the canal and called for the United States to, quote, take it back. Specifically, he's been critical of the role of Hong Kong-based C.K. Hutchison in managing the Balboa and Cristobal ports near the canal since 1997. The U.S. Congress has also remained deeply engaged with the canal's strategic importance. Recently, a resolution was introduced by Senators Mike Lee and co-sponsored by Senators Scott, Tuberville, Blackburn, and Moreno, emphasizing the canal's significance to U.S. national security and economic interests. Also, last January, the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee held a hearing on examining the canal's impact on U.S. trade and security, further reinforcing its importance to U.S. interests. With regard to China, Panama's withdrawal from China's Belt and Road last month reflects a broader shift in its relationship with Beijing. That decision came shortly after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Panama earlier in the year, where he raised concerns about China's influence in the canal zone. More recently, a consortium of U.S. companies led by American asset management firm BlackRock reached a $22.8 billion deal to purchase ports owned globally by C.K. Hutchison, including the Balboa and Cristobal ports near the canal. These ports, which are located at the entrance to from the Atlantic and the Pacific sides, are logistical hubs that handle over 40% of the cargo passing through the canal. At the Atlantic Council, we've been closely tracking these developments and underscoring the canal's importance for global economic and security interests. As you've seen in the video just now showed, last month I had the opportunity to visit the Miraflores locks and to speak about the canal's operations with the Panama Canal Administrator, Dr. Ricardo Vasquez, who is joining us today. He was appointed Administrator of the Panama Canal for a 7-year term starting in 2019. And the Administrator is also here with us today because the Panama Canal Authority, otherwise known as the PCA, is the sole institution responsible for managing the canal, independent of the Panamanian government. The PCA oversees all canal operations, including its neutrality and its efficiency. Administrator, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're very busy. Appreciate your time. I wish I was there with you in Panama, but we're connecting virtually. But thank you again for joining this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. I'd like to start by asking you if you could please share with our audience a little bit about how the Panama Canal Authority works and your specific role as administrator.
Well, the Panama Canal is a portion and was the final portion of the canal zone transferred to Panama administration. So in the early part of the Panama Canal treaties, the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, signed in '77, in 1979, a significant portion of land and facilities were transferred to some entities in the Panamanian government, including railroad and port terminals. But in December 31st, 1999, the Panama Canal, the operation of the waterway, was transferred to Panama Canal Administration. And the entity who received on behalf of Panama the Panama Canal operation, only the Panama Canal operation, I'd like to stress that, was the Panama Canal Authority, or as we call it in Spanish, ACP. ACP was created under a constitutional title. So it's protected from political intervention. It doesn't have a electoral cycle. The board members are elected in staggered terms, 9 years each. We have 11 board members, and the administrator is appointed for a 7-year period. And 99% of, aside from, we are about 87,000 people, 8,700 people. And of them all, about 8 are non-Panamanian nationals, some of them who remain from the U.S. operation and stayed in Panama and work at the Panama Canal. So that was part of the transfer of the Panama Canal. So we operate independently. Our budget is independent from central government budget. We are a very autonomous operation. We work in a blend of something similar to the Tennessee Valley Authority. I think that was a very good example that we copy when we try to build up the governance of the Panama Canal. And with that, then we have this autonomy that allows us to operate close to a corporation, but still do not have the flexibility. Our budget eventually is approved by Congress, and some other decisions, including the nominees for the board of directors, are proposed by the executive branch and approved by Congress. We, as an operation, represent about 5% of Panama's GDP. And so we are not the most significant operation in town, but we are the most influential in the sense that the results on economic performance of the Panama Canal impacts about 50% of Panama's economy. As I mentioned, the labor force is about 8,700, almost all of them Panamanians. And we respond to the Panamanian authorities in everything that we do. And we have to work in a very efficient, sustainable, and profitable operation. And that is the mandate what we have by Constitution. So in summary, this is an autonomous entity, independent from central government, and is only focused and responsible for vessels transiting the Panama Canal and the water resources that are associated with the canal operation.
Thank you so much, and that's a great explanation. The parallel with the Tennessee Valley Authority is a great parallel. I want to use the rest of the conversation to talk about the U.S. role, talk about China, talk about the Neutrality Treaty, as well as some of the efforts that the Panama Canal Authority has taken to further improve the operations and issues of water shortages that you faced in recent years. But let's start with the role of the United States. What is the current role of the U.S. in the canal's operations, including as well the work done by the Army Corps of Engineers?
Well, we had a very extensive relationship with the U.S. authorities and agencies in many different fronts. The work we do, in spite of the fact that the Panama Canal is a Panamanian entity, we get a lot of support from U.S. institutions, not only corporations, but also government institutions. It goes from weather issues and NOAA and to engineering issues to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, security issues with U.S. Southcom to trade elements and commerce with the Department of Agriculture, and research and development and water issues with some of the entities in the U.S., including the National Science Foundation. So there is an extensive relationship between Panama in general and the United States, and the Panama Canal and many of the agencies in the U.S. government. For example, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was instrumental in the transfer of the Panama Canal in very good operational conditions. There was a significant modernization program that was undertaken under the supervision of the Army Corps of Engineers, even after the Panama Canal was transferred to the Panama Canal. All revenues are invested in Panama Canal operations, and then we have improved the capacity of the Panama Canal to operate in a very challenging world with larger vessels and more traffic and more cargo volumes and different products coming through the Panama waterway. One of the most significant elements that we have to point out is in the early part of the Panamanian administration, we were focused into making sure that Panama's performance and delivery quality of service was comparable or better than the services that were provided before transfer. Once we gained confidence on the market, and then the next step was to build a larger set of locks in order to accommodate larger vessels, which was a clear trend at the time the Panama Canal was transferred. So comes 2006, under a national referendum, the Panama Canal Authority was authorized to build, design, and put into operation a third set of locks. That third set of locks, which handles, just to give an example, 15,000 container vessels compared to 5,000 container vessels in the old Panamax lock, was a capital investment that was executed, performed, and put into operation by the Panama Canal Authority, and is a feat of Panamanian engineering with the assistance of international corporations. 55% of the volumes that we move through the Panama Canal move through the new locks. And that accommodates larger vessels, which is important for international trade in order to keep the efficiency of maritime traffic at a level that makes it very competitive, especially when compared with alternative routes. The Panama Canal is not a monopoly. As a matter of fact, the Panama Canal is a shortcut. And we should remain as the most efficient shortcut to move goods and services around the world.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thank you so much, Mr. Vasquez. I had the chance to see those new locks when I was visiting you in Panama in January. I want to also ask, as I mentioned at the outset, the concern expressed by the president, a number of members of Congress as well, about the role of China. What is the role of China in the canal?
Neither China nor other country has any role to play in the administration and the operation of the Panama Canal. We have international contractors. We don't have Chinese contractors at this time. And there is an issue about the terminal ports that were transferred and were tendered out in 1997 prior to the Panama Canal transfer to an international port operator, Hutchinson. Hutchinson at the time was under Hong Kong law. It was a Hong Kongese company that was awarded the contract. Of course, since then, Hong Kong was transferred to China, and then it becomes a corporation operated under Chinese rules and some sort. They have been operating the ports for more than 25 years, and their contract was renewed just recently. But we at the Panama Canal, aside from moving vessels to port and out from port, we do not have any working relationship with any of the port terminals. And that applies not only to the Hutchinson terminals, but also to the Port of Singapore Authority terminals, Cerix terminal, which is a US terminal, and also to other ports, including the Evergreen port in the Atlantic. So in general, we coordinate maritime operations in Panama Canal waters, but we don't have any activity on ports at this time, nor do ports entities do have any involvement in what we do here at the Panama Canal.
So then the BlackRock deal announced last week, the implications for you over at the Panama Canal Authority, I assume based on that last answer, are going to be relatively negligible given the fact that it's a deal with regard to a port rather than with regard to the actual waterway.
So, as I mentioned, the current operation of the Panama Canal really is shaped around, and there were two treaties. The current operation of the Panama Canal is predicated on the basis of the Neutrality Treaty. And the Neutrality Treaty calls for Panama and to be responsible for the continuous operation of the canal. It is an operational treaty. That treaty indicates that we cannot discriminate. So we have to give the same prices to every vessel, and the only way we do not provide discounts, we do not establish individual surcharges. Just as an example, Panama has a very large merchant marine, and there is a number of US flag vessels. Sometimes I've been a little bit under the scope of some issues about some Panamanian flag vessels. But at the Panama Canal, we don't give any preference to Panamanian flag vessels. So we have to remain neutral, and we cannot give preference to anyone. What we do is similar vessels that provide similar services, for example, bulk carriers, containers, roll-on, roll-off vessels, they get charged the same. We have two similar vessels, regardless origin or destination, they are charged the same rate. And that is part of our commitment in the Neutrality Treaty, that we do not give preferences.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
There is only one case. There's only one case. Under the terms of that treaty, U.S. Navy ships do have preference in transit. And that is one unique element that differentiates U.S. Navy vessels from anything else and everyone else that transits the Panama Canal.
So no other Navy ships from other countries have that same preference as U.S. Navy ships do?
Well, if the Navy vessels of other countries come to the Panama Canal, they have to wait in line.
Yeah.
Well,
So, Mr. When my visit to the canal with you recently, you mentioned that the PCA has taken measures to allow customers to secure a string of reservations to improve planning. Could you elaborate a little bit more on these measures and also why the PCA went ahead and undertook these measures to begin with?
yeah, well, actually, what the Panama Canal has mostly been a first in, first out type of service. Now, back in 1990, around, a reservation system was created by the Panama Canal Commission. The Panama Canal Commission allowed for reservations, especially for dry bulkers carrying grain from Louisiana to the Far East. So when the Panama Canal was transferred to Panama, we continued the practice of reservations to some degree. After the West Coast port strike, then container traffic became more relevant to the Panama Canal. And these vessels were on schedule. They were liners that had to be at the port of destination at specific times. That led to the requirement that reservations could have been made for container vessels. So we expanded reservation system from just bulk carriers to container vessels, most of them with U.S. port as a part of the destination. In general, what we have is excess demand that requires to use some of the 36, 38 slots of transit that we operate at full capacity. So when we didn't have water in 2023, then there was a congestion element at the canal. We had 160 vessels waiting to transit and didn't have water capacity to move the whole on a specific schedule, and created delays and overruns, especially for customers. So what we made an announcement is making a forecast of water resources that we will reduce transit to 24 and require reservations for every single vessel transiting the Panama Canal. And even at those times, we had conversations with the U.S. Navy in when and how to transit U.S. Navy vessel in spite of those restrictions. So they didn't have to have any type of reservations. And we have continued in order to adjust capacity to demand to continue the reservation scheme in spite of the fact that a couple of slots at the end of the day are open for auctions depending on who's last coming into transit the Panama Canal. But in general, it was made by auction, by supply and demand, and each shipper and each shipping company decided how much to pay to transit for the at the time of that we have restrictions. Nowadays, all these numbers that were mentioned, which were outliers, the reservation system is very smooth. All prices are about 15% below what they were last year because we have more capacity, and the market forces took care of the pricing structure by itself.
Thank you. As you mentioned, we talked about as well when we visited the water shortages and how, as you just mentioned, how the Panama Canal Authority came up with this system partly as a response to the water shortages, and also how you saw some record high bids for some of these transit slots with offers reaching, I believe, into the millions. Looking forward, how do you see the canal's pricing structure evolving to accommodate the growing demands of global commerce? Is this a system? Yeah, do you see the system evolving?
Yeah, this system is going to evolve. We have introduced long-term booking instead of day-to-day booking and reservations. We are addressing some of the market needs with constant conversation with our customers, our cargo owners. We are including the possibility of expanding the existing operational capacity with some capital investments in providing more navigational assistance in the navigational channels within the Panama Canal. We are introduced high definition satellite navigational systems in order to make sure that we have I lost you?
No, I'm here.
No, sorry. That, technology is playing tricks on me. That we have a better and safe form in order to enhance capacity with the existing infrastructure we have. With that in mind, we believe that we can increase capacity about 15 to 20%, given that we have the amount of water that is required to operate the Panama Canal. Just give you an idea of proportions, the Panama Canal uses on a daily basis the same amount, or 2.5 times the amount of water a city of the size of New York uses. And this is all fresh water and it's rain dependent. We have taken the decision at the board level, and this is something that we had agreed with central government, that we will embark in building a new water reservoir in order to provide more storage capacity to make sure that these fluctuations that are more frequent now and the volatility of rainfall is different than that of the last 50 years, that we have the resources to store water, fresh water, to comply with the needs of the population, but also to the needs of an expanded capacity at the Panama Canal. One final comment that we would like to say is that in order to expand capacity, there is an alternative that we are looking at this time, is to move some cargoes that could be allowed to be transferred by land to have a land corridor in the west bank of the Panama Canal. That is something that has been discussed. We want to link the Pacific bridges with the Atlantic bridges to have more storage capacity for container transshipment, to have roll-on, roll-off for cargo transshipment, to have automobile transshipment in Panama, and also the possibility of some of the energy products that are produced at the Permian Basin in the U.S. have a very reliable and efficient way to move across the Isthmus of Panama to their final destination in the Far East.
And Mr., can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the energy side and what you've seen so far? You just mentioned that at the end, what you've seen so far is opportunities for energy products to even more efficiently use the canal. The 2016 expansion doubled the canal's capacity and allowed for LNG tankers and ships to use the canal for transport. But you also mentioned some other areas of potential improvement to allow for energy shipments to most effectively use the canal.
Well, actually, what we see, and there is a general consensus about it, is that energy exports from the U.S. are going to double over the next 10 years. And we believe that is something that is in very high priority from the current administration. And we have to be instrumental in providing a safe way to these products to go to market. And that is one of the reasons why we are committing significant amount of resources from the Panama Canal Authority to establish the infrastructure that is needed in order to assure that those products get to the final destination timely at a very competitive cost, and we avoid long-term voyages and reduce dependence of other alternative routes.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question here, and we've spent most of the conversation focusing on the canal's operations and future plans, the role of the U.S. and significance for U.S. trade. The canal also, of course, plays a critical role for Latin American economies. 32% of Guatemala's seaboard trade, about 28% of Ecuador's, 24% of Chile's passing through it. How have you seen trade flows from the region evolving? And where do you see, how do you see that continuing to transpire in the years ahead, in addition to the importance of the canal for the U.S.?
We are very relevant to some of the regional economies, especially in their export flows. Most of the export flows are essentially minerals and food products. They compensate the northbound transit going from South America to the U.S. and from South America to Europe. So in order to balance our trade flows, and traffic, some of these products are relevant, and when we consider the volumes and the importance that they have on their local economies, something that we bear in mind is the geopolitical impact of the Panama Canal prices. So we have to remain competitive to any other alternative, not only for US products, but for all products in the region. And because we cannot discriminate, then effectively whatever prices we establish based on value is going to be carried on to all different users of the Panama Canal. For us to establish tolls, we have to go to a hearing, and we make an international hearing every time we make toll adjustments. And at those hearings concur some of the users, some of the cargo owners, and some governments that want to stay their position when related to the impact of Panama Canal prices and the impact in their local export or imports.
Administrator Vasquez, I want to thank you again for joining us today for this incredibly insightful conversation on the Panama Canal Authority, your role, what you've seen over the last few years, as well as your future outlook for the canal and its role, its critical role for U.S. commerce, as well as, of course, for global commerce. So thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching.